Have you ever wondered what's really going on in the mind of an avoidant when you go no contact? They may look calm, detached, even relieved on the surface, but behind the mask, there are unspoken expectations they'll never admit to. And if you don't know these, you'll keep misreading their silence. When we think of avoidance, we imagine people who just want distance. They pull away, they shut down, and when you finally stop reaching out, it looks like you've given them exactly what they wanted. But here's the twist: avoidants don't simply want silence. They have silent expectations that live underneath their aloofness. They won't tell you directly because vulnerability isn't their safe place. Instead, they expect you to decode their distance and act in a way that feeds their hidden needs. And if you've ever felt the confusion of, why do they come back after pulling away? Or why do they seem bothered when I finally stop? It's because these secret expectations weren't met. Let's break down the hidden things avoidants are secretly waiting for during no contact. When an avoidant pulls away and you go no contact, it can feel like they're fine, like they've simply shut a door and moved on. They might even look more relaxed, post more online, or act as if life is lighter without the weight of the relationship. But what you don't see beneath that exterior is the quiet expectation they carry that you're still thinking about them. It's a paradox that defines avoidant behavior. On the outside, they present themselves as someone who doesn't need reassurance, who thrives on independence, and who is unfazed by distance. On the inside, however, there's a subtle hope that you haven't truly detached. That in your silence, you're still orbiting around them, replaying memories, wondering what they're doing, and quietly waiting for their return. This expectation isn't always conscious. Many avoidants won't sit there and tell themselves, I need you to think about me. It runs deeper than words. It's an unspoken belief rooted in their attachment style. If they create distance, they can reduce the pressure of intimacy while still maintaining the invisible tether of your attention. Your thoughts, your emotional energy, even your frustration become a kind of proof that they still matter. And for an avoidant, that is a form of security. They may never check in directly, but they will imagine that their absence is stirring something in you. They expect that their silence is not silence at all. It's noise in your head. Think of it like this: if you're pacing around, wondering why they haven't reached out, what you did wrong, or when they'll come back, that is exactly the invisible confirmation they want, even if they never admit it. To the avoidant, distance is not the end of connection, it's a way of controlling it. By stepping back, they give themselves the freedom to breathe while trusting that you'll still be emotionally tethered to them. It's as if they're saying without words, I want the space to feel safe, but I also want to know I still live rent-free in your mind. This is why no contact can rattle an avoidant in ways they don't show. They expect you to carry the weight of their absence. They expect the silence to hurt you more than it hurts them. And because of this expectation, many avoidants are genuinely surprised when no contact doesn't go the way they assumed. If you use the silence to heal, to redirect your focus, or to detach, it challenges the unspoken contract they thought existed. They anticipated distance would make you crave them more, not less. They expected you to remain emotionally available even while physically apart. So when you're in no contact and you're tempted to imagine that their indifference means you're forgotten, remember this: their quietest expectation is that you're still carrying them in your thoughts. That's the piece they won't tell you, the part they'll never confess. It allows them to maintain their armor, to keep up the illusion of independence, all while secretly relying on the belief that they still matter deeply to you, even in silence. When an avoidant withdraws and you stop reaching out, it's easy to assume they've closed the door completely and want nothing more from you. They appear content in their silence, almost as though the distance has solved everything for them. Yet behind that calm exterior is an unspoken expectation. They want you to be the one who reaches out first. This expectation is rarely voiced because doing so would require them to expose a vulnerability they're not comfortable with. Reaching out risks rejection, risks neediness, risks showing a level of dependence that contradicts the identity they hold on to so tightly. Instead, they lean on the silent hope that you'll be the one to bridge the gap. This dynamic is rooted in control. By waiting for you to make the first move, the avoidant gets to keep their emotional armor intact. They can tell themselves, I didn't chase, I didn't need. They came to me. It preserves the sense of safety they feel in not having to take emotional risks. But at the same time, it satisfies a very human need for reassurance. They want proof that you still care, that you're willing to step into the uncomfortable space of silence and extend a hand toward them. For them, this is the best of both worlds. They don't risk their pride or their heart, but they still get the validation that they matter. What makes this expectation complicated is that it's hidden. On the surface, they may appear indifferent or even resistant. If you do reach out, they might not meet you with open arms immediately. They might respond with short answers, hesitation, or even a little coldness. But underneath that exterior, your effort tells them everything they secretly wanted to know. It proves that despite the distance, you still care enough to move toward them. It proves they still hold a place in your world. In fact, the very act of you initiating contact relieves a tension they might not even consciously acknowledge: the fear of being forgotten. This unspoken desire for you to reach out first is why so many avoidants circle back after long stretches of silence. When you've stopped chasing and they no longer get the reassurance they expected, it can unsettle them. They start to realize the dynamic they counted on, where you bridge the gap, has shifted. What surprises them most is not that you stopped contacting them, but that you didn't eventually break and run back. That silence challenges their hidden script. It forces them to confront the possibility that if they want the connection to continue, they may have to take the very risk they've spent so long avoiding. So while they may never admit it, during no contact, an avoidant often sits with the quiet expectation that you'll be the one to reach out. It's their way of keeping intimacy at a safe distance while still feeding the need for closeness. They can't say it outright because to do so would shatter the image of self-reliance they hold, but they feel it all the same. They want you to make the first move, because in their world, that's how they get reassurance without having to sacrifice control. When you step into no contact with an avoidant, one of the things they secretly expect, though they will never voice it, is proof that you haven't truly moved on. To them, silence is not just silence, it's a test. They want to believe that even though you've stopped reaching out, your emotions are still tied to them. They imagine that you're sitting with your phone in your hand, debating whether to break the silence, wondering what they're doing, questioning if they miss you. This belief gives them comfort. It allows them to maintain distance without losing the assurance that the bond is still intact, even if it's invisible. For an avoidant, closeness often feels suffocating, but abandonment feels unbearable. It's this contradiction that drives their unspoken expectations. By pulling away, they hope to regain control of their emotional space, but they don't actually want you to detach completely. They want to know you're still emotionally invested, even if you're no longer in contact. It's almost as if they want you to wait in the wings, proving your loyalty in silence, showing that you still care enough to endure the distance. This expectation shows up in subtle ways. They may not contact you, but they might watch your social media from a distance, curious about whether your life reflects freedom or longing. They may not say they miss you, but they'll feel a sense of unease if they notice you thriving without them. In their mind, thriving equals moving on, and moving on disrupts the safety net they quietly rely on. The idea that you're still emotionally tied to them, even when you're apart, offers them the reassurance they crave without forcing them to face the vulnerability of expressing it. The paradox is striking. They avoid intimacy to protect themselves, but they expect loyalty from the very people they push away. They might never say it, but in their world, silence is supposed to highlight your longing, not your strength. They assume that even if you're not calling or texting, you're still replaying the past, waiting for a signal, keeping your heart reserved for them. They expect that their absence carries weight in your life, that it hasn't simply been shrugged off. This is why when someone in no contact truly begins to detach, an avoidant often becomes unsettled. The expectation was that you would remain emotionally anchored, but if you start to heal, invest in yourself, and show signs of moving forward, it quietly disrupts their assumptions. They realize the emotional safety net they counted on may no longer exist. And that realization can stir feelings they didn't anticipate: jealousy, confusion, or even the sudden urge to return. So while it may appear that the avoidant is perfectly content with the distance, what they're really expecting is confirmation that you're still tethered to them. They may not need constant messages or overt displays of affection, but they secretly hope your silence is heavy with thoughts of them. It reassures them that, despite the walls they've built, they still hold an undeniable place in your heart. When an avoidant retreats and you go no contact, one of the hidden expectations they carry is that you'll respect the boundaries they've set, but still remain emotionally available to them. It's a contradictory position, but it reflects the inner tension of the avoidant mindset. They crave space because intimacy can feel overwhelming, yet they don't want that space to sever the connection completely. To them, distance is supposed to provide relief without the consequence of losing access to you. In their ideal world, you give them room to breathe while keeping yourself in a state of quiet readiness, waiting for them to return when they feel safe again. This expectation is deeply rooted in their need for control. By asking for space or creating it through withdrawal, they regain a sense of autonomy. They feel less pressured, less exposed. But beneath that, there's a belief that you'll honor their boundaries without resentment, and at the same time, you'll keep the door open. They want the best of both worlds' freedom without the fear of abandonment. It's not something they'll ever articulate because on the surface it sounds unreasonable, but internally it makes perfect sense to them. They don't see the contradiction because they view it as a survival mechanism. From their perspective, if you respect their need for distance, it proves you understand them. It signals that you're not trying to control or suffocate them, but if you also remain available, it reassures them that the bond hasn't been broken. That availability may take different forms, responding warmly if they eventually reach out, not showing anger at the silence, or subtly leaving signs that you're still open to connection. To the avoidant, this balance of respecting space while staying accessible is what allows them to feel safe enough to re-engage when they're ready. The challenge is that this expectation places an emotional burden on the other person. It requires you to suppress your own needs for reassurance while continuing to keep space open for them. You're asked, without words, to wait in the wings and remain loyal, even as they withdraw. This hidden demand is part of what makes being connected to an avoidant so confusing. You feel pushed away, but at the same time, you sense they don't want you to disappear entirely. They want distance, but not disconnection. What often surprises them during no contact is when the script doesn't play out this way. If you use the silence to create firm boundaries of your own, or if you begin to detach emotionally, it disrupts their expectation. They thought you would give them space without ever moving too far away. They counted on your availability even as they insisted on their independence. When that availability starts to fade, it forces them to confront the reality that boundaries cut both ways. The same distance they wanted to protect themselves can also protect you, and that realization shifts the dynamic in ways they never planned for. When an avoidant distances themselves and you go no contact, one of the silent expectations they carry is that the rules of the relationship or the dynamic they've grown comfortable with will remain the same. They assume that even in silence, nothing fundamental will shift. You'll still see them in the same light, you'll still respond the same way if they return, and you'll still allow them to hold the same level of influence over you. In other words, they expect the power balance to remain untouched. This is one of the most unspoken but deeply ingrained assumptions avoidants make, and it explains why they're often surprised when the person they left behind grows stronger in their absence. To the avoidant, pulling away is not necessarily an act of finality. It's more like putting the connection on pause. They imagine they can step back, enjoy the space, and then re-enter later to find things just as they were. That's why they often don't worry about how long no contact lasts. They quietly believe that their position in your life is secure, that the emotional connection will hold steady while they're gone. They don't anticipate that the distance might actually cause you to reset your own perspective. What makes this expectation so revealing is that it exposes how much avoidants rely on consistency, even as they present themselves as detached. They might avoid intimacy and fear dependence, but they still count on the relationship dynamics staying predictable. If you are always the one reaching out first, they assume you'll continue to be. If you forgave their distance before, they expect you'll forgive it again. They don't expect you to rewrite the script. To them, silence is supposed to be a temporary break, not a transformation. This is why no contact has the power to shift everything. When you don't reach out, when you don't chase, when you don't offer the same reassurances they've grown accustomed to, it unsettles the narrative they've built in their head. They start to realize that the rules they thought were fixed have actually changed. Instead of being able to rely on your emotional availability, they're faced with the possibility that you've reclaimed your independence. That's when their expectation collides with reality. For the avoidant, this can create a kind of cognitive dissonance. They expected silence to reinforce the old dynamic, that you would wait, hold space, and be there when they felt ready. But when your silence demonstrates growth instead of longing, it confronts them with something they didn't prepare for. The power balance begins to tilt, not because you're playing games, but because you've stopped allowing the old patterns to dictate your responses. This is the part they never admit. They don't want the rules to change because the old rules kept them safe and in control. Yet silence has a way of rewriting those rules all on its own, and that shift can be more unsettling to them than the distance itself. When you step back and really see these hidden expectations for what they are, you begin to understand that avoidants aren't as detached as they appear. Their silence isn't just absence, it's full of unspoken needs, quiet tests, and assumptions about how you'll respond. They expect you to keep thinking about them, to reach out first, to prove you haven't moved on, to stay available even when they create distance, and to keep the rules exactly as they've always been. But here's the truth: once you recognize these patterns, you get to decide whether you want to keep playing by those rules or create new ones that protect your peace. No contact isn't just about waiting for someone to notice your absence. It's about reclaiming your own energy, showing yourself that you can stand strong without needing their validation. And that's where your power lives, not in proving anything to them, but in proving to yourself that you are more than their silence, more than their expectations, and more than the dynamic they want to keep you locked in. Thank you for giving me your time, your focus, and your open heart today. I hope these insights give you clarity, but more importantly, give you strength. Remember, you don't need to chase anyone who keeps pulling away. The right connection won't require you to fight for scraps of attention. Hold on to that truth because it will carry you forward with confidence and calm. Goodbye for now, and thank you so much for listening. Stay strong, stay self-aware, and most of all, stay true to you.